Hello and welcome, I'm your Code Monkey. In this lecture we're going to make a super simple main menu and a loading system. Okay, so every game needs a main menu, so let's build one. Let's begin by making the scene, so let's go into our scenes and create a brand new scene. Call this the main menu scene. And okay, here's our default scene. Now over here, for the most part, we really just want some basic buttons, so nothing too special. So let's create a brand new UI canvas. And let's set it up as usual, so screen space overlay, yep. Then let's go with scale with screen size, 1920 by 1080. And let's match with the height. Okay, so there's our canvas. Now inside, let's make an empty game object. Name this the main menu UI. Let's stretch it to occupy the entire thing, so 0, 0 on everything, okay. Now inside, let's create a brand new UI button. Let's name this the play button. Then inside for the text, let's say play. Let's size the button to be quite a bit bigger, so let's say 450 by 150. And on the text itself, let's put it in bold, on a font size quite a bit bigger, let's say 70. Then let's also change the color. Let's put the text in white and the play button over here, the normal color for the image. Let's put it on a dark gray. Then also over here on the button background, let's add a nice outline. Let's put it on full black, say something like 3:3. Then let's make a shadow, and for this one 5 - 5. Okay, so that's our basic button. Let's just anchor the button, so choose the play button. Let's anchor it on the lower left corner, and let's push it just a bit like this. Okay, pretty simple. Now let's duplicate this one, push it a bit lower. Let's also make it just a tiny bit smaller, so just 120. This is going to be our quit button, so let's rename this to the quit button. And inside for the text, just say quit, and put a bit lower on the font size. Okay, like this. Okay, so we have the two basic buttons that we need. Now let's make the script to run them. So let's make a script with the same name, so main menu UI. So let's go into our script UI folder, create new script for the main menu UI. Let's attach the script and open. Okay, so now here let's begin by making serialized fields for our buttons. So a serialized field, private of type button inside unityengine.ui. This is the play button, and then we have another one for the quit button, okay? Back in the editor, let's drag the references, so that's the play button and the quit button, okay? Now here in the code, let's add some listeners to these buttons, so let's do a private void awake, and on awake, let's go into the play button and go into the onClick event, so the event when the player clicks on the button, and let's add a listener, and now we pass in the listener. Now over here, to do this, we can add a function, so we can make a private void play click. We can define a function kind of like this, and over here add it as a listener. So that's one approach. Or another alternative that personally I like to use is to use what is called a lambda expression. So instead of defining an external function down here, we just go up here and directly we define a lambda. So we open parameters to display the parameters for the function, which in this case we have none, so just open and close. Then we do a nice little arrow, and then we have whatever we want to be our click code. So both the code that I have here and the one that I have here, both of these are exactly the same thing. This one is called a lambda expression, which is also a type of delegate. Definitely go ahead and watch my video on C# delegates in detail. It's yet another extremely powerful C# feature. I find them especially useful, especially over here to setting the click listeners. There's no need to make another function, just use a lambda expression and that's it. So over here I'm going to use that instead of an external function. Okay, so we've got the play, and then let's also listen to the quit. So on the quit button, the exact same thing. Okay, now first on the quit button, it's actually very simple. We just go into application and we call the quit function. This will quit the game, that's it, very simple. Although one note, if we actually test it like this, so here is the game playing, and if I click on quit, and nope, nothing happens. Now the logic is actually working. We can see visually that the button is changing state, so we are indeed capturing clicks. However, when the game is running inside the editor, calling that function, the application.quit, doesn't do anything. But if this were a full build, then clicking on that would indeed close our game. Okay, so now for the play button. For this one, it's also very simple. We just need to go inside the scene manager, which is inside unityengine.scene management. We just need to go inside of this one, and we call load scene. This function will load a certain scene, and for loading, we can either use the scene build index, or we can use the scene name. Like I've mentioned several times, string names are horrible. Although in this case, the alternative using an int is also not very good. Just a number is very hard to read the code and be able to know what scene this is loading. So there's one better approach that I prefer to use, but first over here, let's just use the index just for testing. So we're going to load the scene on index 1, so just like this. And then here in the editor, let's go into File and Build Settings. And over here we see the scenes in our build. Right now we just have the game scene. So let's just add our scene. So let's drag the main menu scene and drag it on there. And also let's make sure it's on the top of the list. Basically the first scene is the one that won't be loaded as soon as the game starts. So let's drag it right up top, just like that. Then over here on the right we see the index. So by loading the scene on index 1, we're going to be loading the game scene. Okay, so with this let's test. So here we are, and if I click on play, and if there you go, it does load the main scene. Okay, great, everything is working. So this is the simplest way to do scene loading. However, this method does have one issue. It's not super noticeable in a game of this scale because it loads pretty quickly. But like this, note how when we click on play, there you go, everything freezes for a little bit while the game is loading. Like I mentioned, in this case the freeze is so small, so not necessarily an issue. But if the game was much more complex, then the player would be staring at a frozen main menu for perhaps 30 seconds. That would not be good. One way to avoid that is actually very simple. Basically, it's what I already covered in detail in the scene loading video. That video was made quite a while ago, but it's still very much up to date. Here we're going to do pretty much the same thing. So we first create the scene, just empty, just saying loading. And then from that scene, we load the final scene. That way the game stays frozen on a scene that says loading, which is much more clear to the player. So let's do that. First, let's make our scene. So inside our scenes folder, let's create a brand new scene. Call this the loading scene. Okay, let's go inside. And now in this one, we want this one to be fully black, so let's go into the main camera and scroll down over here under environment, and instead of rendering the skybox, for the background let's go with a solid color, and let's go with full black. Okay, there's our black main camera. Now let's make a canvas, so a new UI canvas. Let's set it up as usual, so scale with screen size, 1920 by 1080, and match with the height, okay? Then inside, let's just make a simple text object. So just say text, then over here, let's say just loading. Let's put the text width and height on 0, put it on bold. Let's make sure to disable wrapping and push it over there on the side and maybe increase the font size by a little bit. Okay, there you go. We have our very basic loading screen. Now we're going to load this scene, and then whilst on this scene, we're going to load the final scene. Although also one very important thing related to loading scenes is you need to remember the lifetime of the objects. Regular game objects, like for example the ones that we see here in the hierarchy, these get destroyed when you do a scene change. So for the goal that we're trying to achieve, we need to load this loading scene, but then also somehow transfer data so that the loading scene here knows which one is the final scene. Now you might think that over here on the main menu we could create a game object, attach a script that would hold the reference to the final scene, but like I said, game objects get destroyed as soon as we load the loading scene. So for transferring data between scenes, we can't really use a regular script on a regular game object. Now one approach is to use the don't destroy on load. This is a Unity function that helps you stop a particular script or a game object from being destroyed. That way the object won't persist through scene changes, so that's one option. But another option that I prefer is very simple. Let's just make a loader class. So let's create a new C# script, call this loader. And over here, let's go ahead and make this class a static class, and we are not going to extend mono behavior. So just like this. Basically, by making it static, it means that this one is not attached to any specific instance of an object. This class cannot be attached to any object and cannot have any instances constructed. Then inside we can add static functions and fields, like for example, a static int for the target scene index. So now this field, we could set this field from over here on the main menu UI, and when we would load, we would not be resetting this field. Also here, I should point out one quick thing. You can make fields static without making the entire class itself static. Making the class static is just a good approach if the entire thing, if everything in this class is also meant to be static. If you don't make it static, then you can have regular fields here. You can have both static and non-static. Whereas if you make this static, then you're going to have an error because you cannot have non-static fields. So this is another clean code thing. If it's only meant to contain static logic, then make the class itself static. Okay, so we have a static field for our target scene. But as usual, we don't want this to be a public field. We don't want the main menu to directly write to this field. So let's make this class the only one responsible for anything related with scene loading. So instead, let's make a function, so a public static void, call it load. And for a parameter, let's receive a string for the target scene name. Then over here, we'll load the actual scene. So let's go into the scene manager and load the scene. And let's pass in the target scene name. Okay, that's it. And then over here on the main menu UI, instead of directly loading a scene, let's go into the loader and call load. and pass in the scene name, so that's the game scene. Okay, so this is what we're going to do, that's good. Except it's obviously not good. Over here we're using string names, that's horrible, we should never use this. So let's avoid using strings as much as possible, and one simple way is to just define an enum for all of our scenes. So let's go here on the loader and let's define that. So a public enum, let's call it scene. And for all of our scenes, so we have the main menu scene, then we have the game scene and the loading scene. Okay, so then down here on this function, instead of receiving a string, we just receive a scene for the target scene, and we use the target scene. Although, of course, the Unity API does not support loading our custom enum, it has to be an index or a string, so the simple approach is just to convert this one into a string. That's it. So the only thing you need to make sure is that the enum values over here match the actual name on the actual scenes perfectly. So don't make any mistakes, keep it case sensitive, so don't do this, make sure everything matches perfectly. Okay, so just like this, everything should already be working the same as previously. So the main menu calls that, let's actually just use that. So let's use scene.gameScene. So on the main menu we do this, and on the loader we load the scene. Okay, let's test. Here is the main menu, and if we click and wait a bit, and yep, there you go, it didn't load the game scene. Okay, great. So everything still works the same as previously, except now all of the loading logic is inside of this class. And over here, let's load a loading scene in the middle. Basically, when we have this function to load a final scene, let's first off set this field. So this one, instead of being type int, let's make it of type scene, and this is going to be the target scene, and let's make it private, okay? So when we have this function, let's set that field. Although here, remember how this is a static class, so in order to access this field, we need to access it through the class name, because over here we also have a local variable with the exact same name. So let's access the unloader.targetScene and set it to the target scene. So again, don't be confused here. You can even use Visual Studio and put the cursor on top to see what object represents what. So you can see the unloader.targetScene is referencing this field, whereas this one over here is referencing the local field. So we want to assign the member field to the one that we received as a parameter. Okay, so we stored that, and then let's immediately load the loading scene. So scene manager, let's load the scene, and we're going to load the scene.loadingScene.toString. Okay, so we're going to load that. And now here comes the tricky part. If we do this, so if we load the loading scene and then immediately load the target scene, if we do it like this, it won't actually show the loading scene. We're calling these functions one right after the other, so it will load one and immediately the other. Basically, we need to wait at least one frame to render so that the loading scene is visible, and then we can load the final scene. So let's make a script to do a very simple job. Let's create a brand new C# script for the unloader callback. And now let's go inside the unloading scene. So this is important. Let's make this on the loading scene, not the main menu or the game scene. So over here, let's create an empty game object for the unloader callback. Let's reset transform, just keep things nice and clean. And let's attach the script, so the unloader callback, okay. And on this script, we want to basically just wait for the very first update. So let's do a private bool is first update. And we start it off as true, actually. So is the first update is true, then we do a private void update. So if it is the first update, if so, then let's set is first update to false. And we have the first update. Although technically I should point out that we don't really need this. We're going to load right away, so either way it will only run one update, but still I like to add this just to make the logic perfectly clear. Basically, if it is the first update, then let's call a function on the unloader. So on the loader over here, let's make a function, public static void, call it loader callback. Okay, we have this function. So over here on the unloader callback, let's just go into the unloader and call the unloader callback function. All right. So basically now here we have this function that is going to be triggered on the first update. So we know for certain the unloading scene has been rendered. So it's over here that we want to load the actual final scene. Okay, that's it. Here we have a super simple loading system. Just make perfectly sure that the unloader callback with the script, this one only exists on the loading scene. It should not be on any of the other ones. So let's test, and for that, let's go inside the main menu scene. Okay, and now let's hit on play. Okay, so here we are on the main menu. Now if I click on play, and actually here's the thing that I forgot, so make sure you don't forget this. We need to add the unloading scene to the builds in order to be able to load. So let's go up here into the build settings. Let's go into the project, drag the unloading scene like that. Okay, so now let's test. So here we are on the main menu. Let's hit on play, and there's the loading scene. And after a bit, yep, here we have our game scene. All right, awesome. So with that, everything is working perfectly. All of the logic is working great. Now that it all works great, let's just make a nice proper visual for our main menu. So for that, let's go inside the game scene, and over here let's copy a few things. So let's pick up the floor object, and let's also pick up the global volume with the post-processing. So let's copy both of these. Let's go into the main menu scene, and over here let's paste both objects, okay? Now let's also drag some player visuals. So let's put this in 3D, go back down into the floor, and let's pick up some visuals. So let's go inside our assets on the prefabs visuals. Let's find over here the player visual. Again, make sure you drag the visual only. We don't want any logic components. And by the way, this is yet another great benefit of separating the logic from the visuals. Right now, it's super simple for us to place some players here because we have just the visuals completely separated from the logic. Okay, so on the visual, let's just make it look at the camera. Let's position a bunch more players. So let's duplicate this and put one to the side. We're going to move the camera in a bit, but now let's just place them. And in the included assets, there are a bunch of materials. So over here we see the player body, then we've got a blue, a green, and a red. Like I said, this first course is on making this game in single player, but the goal is to then make a second course after this one on converting this game into multiplayer, so that's why I included multiple colors. So let's just drag these. Let's go into this player visual, and on this one, make it blue. So on the head and on the body. Then on this one on the side here, let's make this one green. So green there and green on the head. And for the one behind, let's make this one the red one. So put it in red and in red. Okay, so we've got our nice 4 players. Now let's also add a camera. So we're going to have the camera kind of like this, kind of from below looking upwards. I think that looks pretty good. For that, let's use Cinemachine. So let's go into Game Object, go into Cinemachine, and let's create a brand new virtual camera. Okay, like this, let's just push it up a little bit. Okay, so this is our nice composition. Now on the virtual camera, let's just go ahead and add some noise. So let's add basic multi-channel purlin. So let's do it just like we did when we first added Cinemachine. So let's use the handheld normal mild. And now let's just play around these fields, which by the way, you can do that while the game is playing. So let's hit on play. And over here, you can play around all the fields. Although actually defaults already look pretty good. But let's put the frequency maybe a little bit less and the amplitude maybe a little bit bigger. So just some nice little sway. And by the way, if you make any changes to the Cinemachine virtual camera, and if now you stop playing, it will actually lose those changes. But over here on the virtual camera, there's this nice toggle, save during play. So if you tick this, and now you exit play mode, and there you go, those changes were saved. Okay, great. Now let's just make sure to untick this so we don't accidentally modify it. Okay, so here we have the basic visual that we want. Finally, there's also a game logo in the included assets. So let's just go into our canvas, into our main menu. Let's create a brand new UI image. Let's assign the logo sprite. Then let's just position it on that corner. So let's move it all the way up there. We can anchor it to the top left corner. And let's make it a bit bigger. And by the way, on something like this, if you play around this, it might get a bit stretched. So if so, over here on the options on the image, you can toggle this one to preserve the aspect ratio. So that way, even if you stretch, it won't actually be stretched. It will always be perfect. Okay, just like this. Okay, so here we have our basic main menu. It's a basic setup, but it looks pretty good. And with that, we have built a nice main menu alongside with a loading system. So I can click on play, it goes into the loading scene and then into the game scene, so that's great. The next thing that we need is some kind of pause button, so let's do that in the next lecture.